everyone and welcome to our latest Travel Weekly webcast. This is part of our Roadmap to Recovery series. Today we're talking about responsible travel, especially in the wake of the pandemic. So I'm joined today by Kasia Morgan, Head of Sustainability and Community at Exodus Travels, Megan Parkinson, Partnerships and Member Services Manager for the Latin American Travel Association, and Veronica Blach, Head of Environmental Programmes for the TUI Care Foundation. And I'm Laura French, Deputy Features Editor for Travel Weekly. So obviously before the COVID crisis, there was this huge emphasis on sustainability, and I think that consumers, travellers were becoming ever more aware of the importance of travelling responsibly and ethically. But as travel businesses now just really fight to survive, have these issues kind of fallen down on the agenda, or are they still a priority? Kasia, should we start with you?
Sure. I think the answer is yes and no. I think inevitably, as you say, as the travel sector kind of fights for its survival at the moment and really thinks about how to get back on track following this pandemic, I think there's inevitably been a kind of a pressure on resource, a kind of realigning of focus and obviously investment into only the very kind of immediately urgent items on the agenda. But actually also no, because I think there are numerous companies, lots of examples out there across the travel sector of organisations that really see sustainability issues as integral to the future success of their companies and of coming back on track. And even when this isn't so consciously the case, I think what we're seeing is that many of the steps that travel organisations will be taking to kind of build business back after COVID are kind of inextricably linked anyway with sustainability issues and bring kind of sustainability either benefits or impacts, whether or not the intention behind that. And I'm sure we'll draw some of that out in the rest of our chat.
And Megan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, you know, there are things that are, you know, there are compromises that are having to be made at the moment. Certainly, as we plan to restart tourism, I mean, one of the things that I think has been huge, certainly across society, has been trying to sort of limit single-use plastics, etc. Which I know that when like certainly the safety guidelines that are coming in are sort of outlining that, but. Yeah, so, you know, I think there are going to be compromises for things like that. But certainly at Lata, what we're trying to do is to put in place guidelines for our members that make sure that there are sort of stipulation in terms of the way those are disposed of, etc. And sort of as we move forward, that we can sort of act in a much more sustainable way. I think particularly in Latin America, that it's such a selling point for the region. A lot of our partners out in Latin America, sustainability is like they're real pioneers for it. So, you know, I think initially there will be things that need to be in place to sort of safeguard the safety of travellers, but ultimately I think that sustainability is still going to be top of our agenda, certainly at Lata.
And Veronica, what are your thoughts on that, touching on the idea that single-use plastics are almost coming back in a way because of those COVID hygiene measures, and what impact is that having?
Yeah, I think that it's a difficult discussion to have, right? Because as we mentioned, the priority is really health and safety first, especially also thinking about communities in these local destinations. As a foundation, we work with these communities very closely, and of course they're prioritizing their health, they're prioritizing access to food, and plastic isn't really top of mind. But I think that what we can do there is, as organizations and as foundations, we can really guide the conversation, because a lot of times sustainability and health does go hand in hand, and we've seen that, right? So I think that that through these important messaging, through clear guidelines, I think that we can achieve both, actually. So as a foundation, we're really trying to achieve both in parallel. We do have a few initiatives that really focus on reducing single-use plastics. So for example, in Cyprus, we had launched a campaign last year on how to reduce and to incentivize businesses to reduce plastics. So this was the Sand and Sea Plastic-Free campaign that we've actually managed to bring back now. And we do still see commitment from these businesses that initially had signed up, and we're seeing new businesses signing up. So you can see that there's still this commitment, and we're really also trying to engage the community through some fun exercises. We have a whale that we place on the boardwalk, for example, to collect plastics and then recycle it. So it seems silly, but I think that there's this conversation that can happen in parallel. I don't think one is exclusive to the other.
No.
Yeah, definitely. That's promising to hear. And obviously we think of sustainability, I think primarily of kind of environmental and green issues, but really that's just a small part of it, I suppose. And there are so many different issues. So what else does it really mean? Like, Kasia, how would you define sustainability?
Gosh, well, really, I guess it's thinking about the resources that our organisation uses to deliver its product, and the impact that it has in so doing. And as you say, that is not just about conservation of places with regard to waste, but we're also thinking obviously about the kind of environmental impact through carbon and the kind of action that we need to be taking on climate change, and then also about people and community impact of the travels that they're doing and that we're taking our travellers on, and how we can increasingly make sure that we are bringing benefit to those amazing destinations that we want to continue taking our travellers to kind of far into the future.
Yeah, and you mentioned communities. Obviously, COVID has had a devastating impact on communities across the world. Do you think that the travel industry is doing enough to support small businesses in those local communities? Could we be doing more? Megan, from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think at the moment we're facing probably the biggest crisis our industry's ever faced. So, it's understandable that people are really sort of focusing on getting their, securing their businesses for the future, and that's really important. But I think, it is still really important to focus on the community, certainly from our perspective out in Latin America. Lata has a charitable arm, the Lata Foundation, and we've been operating for around, I'm a trustee for the foundation, we've been operating for around 13 years now. And we support sort of social, educational and conservation projects in areas where tourism is a real focus for those communities. And now we are really seeing that they're really struggling, because not only do they not have the income from tourism, but also the funding, the charitable funding, comes from the tourism industry. So they're in real dire straits. We've actually created a emergency appeal for this in order to try and sort of get funds out to those that really need it. For example, in Peru, things like the Porters of the Inca Trail now have had no work for the whole season, so they're really in dire straits, and we're trying to actually get food parcels out to them to make sure that they've got basic needs. And we're also supplying things like PPE equipment to various projects so that they can continue their work. I think it is really important that we all pull together as an industry. We've got a logo. We're trying to encourage our members to sort of push funds out to those people that really need it at this time. So I do think it's really important the whole industry get behind things like those initiatives and really support those who really need our help at this time.
And Veronica and Kasia, do you think, again, the industry is doing enough? Or I know that you've also got programs. The TUI Care Foundation, for example, has launched a Corona support.
Yeah, we've launched the Corona Relief Program. And as a first stage of that, we are similar to Lata. We are providing support to not only small social enterprises, but also charitable organizations on the ground. We have contacted them, of course, through our projects that we are still very much in contact with. That way we really reach the people that are most vulnerable in those destinations. And what I think is really important to highlight here as well is that tourism is really a tool for development, and we've seen that in the past. Before this pandemic, we're boasting numbers about job creation, about how many people we're educating, how many people we're reaching and empowering, including more vulnerable groups such as women, younger children, people in rural communities, even indigenous people. So I think that we need to remember how powerful tourism really can be, especially through these times. And that's where I see that these type of travel foundations really have a very important role to be able to lift people out of these situations for now, and then help them build back stronger and better after the lockdowns have passed and once the economy is starting up again. So I think that's just something that we need to keep in mind, and of course we need to help the people that really need the support right now, through not only provision of PPE, but also through the distribution of food. We've had a lot of projects that are focusing on the distribution of food to a lot of these families that now no longer have an income to sustain their families. So we're really trying to reach out as much as possible with what we can. And I think that's also going to help us in the long run and help those communities in the long run to have those ties with such initiatives. And it'll build confidence in the long run.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think I totally agreeing with what Veronica and Megan have said. I think that we've seen the travel industry be pretty responsive pretty quickly with adapting and reacting. So from our point of view, the Exodus Travels Foundation was able to work quite quickly with our kind of NGO partners to whom we were already kind of providing funding to kind of adapt their programming to respond. So for example, on Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, where we were hearing reports on the ground about, just like Megan, you mentioned, the Inca Trail porters are Kilimanjaro porters suddenly facing a whole season without income. We were able to work with our partners to kind of quickly adapt that programming so that we were in fact being able to kind of train them up on subsistence farming and money management to try and kind of help get them through that time. But again, back to Veronica's point, there's a bigger picture there. There's fantastic philanthropy going on, and that's super important. But actually, it's also about all of us kind of turning the wheels to get travel and tourism back to these areas as soon as we kind of safely and responsibly can, so that people can be exploring these destinations again, bringing that kind of local income, the benefits of that cultural exchange, and all of that, getting that back on track as soon as we're able to as an industry.
Yeah, and it's nice to see everyone working together to kind of rebuild. And on that note, there was a lot of talk about how we could kind of use this pause and use the lockdown to think about how we could rebuild and how we could travel more responsibly. So do you think that's played out? Do you think that people have thought more about that? And if so, what opportunities do you think that this time has kind of created for the future? Megan?
Yeah, I think I think there's definitely been a pause. I think, you know, people are starting to talk about these things. There's no doubt about it. And I think the forefront of everyone's mind at the moment is restarting tourism ultimately. But, you know, I think what's really fantastic about what we've seen and the positives that this lockdown has brought is that, you know, we are actually communicating better, actually using Zoom on, you know, 5-6 times a day. I mean, I'm talking with people out in Latin America on a daily basis that really I wouldn't have done before. And I think that the real communication all the way up and down the chain is only going to be a really positive thing going forward. And when we really want to address, I mean, we are starting to address these issues, but, you know, these are things that we can now have open, direct conversations with people. And I think that communication can only continue and be a really positive thing going forward.
And thinking about flying, I know there's been some sort of talk recently of carbon footprint and the impact that has, but communities, as you mentioned, are so reliant on flight tourism. So how do we kind of strike the balance between those two really delicate issues? And do you think that perhaps in the future people might travel less frequently but for longer periods? Have you seen any trends like that? Kasia, for example, with Exodus, what do you think?
Yeah, we're kind of seeing increasing amounts of interest in the kind, or should I say an increasing amount of awareness amongst our clients about the carbon impact of their holidays as a whole. And obviously part of that is aviation, not the whole of it. There are other things we can be doing as tour operators and as the travel industry to make sure that travel and our adventures are kind of lower impact. But yeah, we've seen an increasing amount of interest amongst our clients to look at kind of different modes of travel, or to think about using those flights and using that particular element of carbon impact of their trips kind of more consciously and mindfully. So I think in terms of, as you say, those kind of parts of the world, there's destinations that really rely on flight tourism, but making sure that we're keeping in mind the carbon impact and the impact that has on the kind of wider destinations and our planet. I guess it's about that kind of style of travel, thinking about taking perhaps longer trips and less flights, thinking about swapping out some flights for kind of train travel as that becomes increasingly cheaper and easier to do, but also again coming back to making those flights count, trying to kind of engage our clients in thinking about the fact that actually the kind of, if they're taking responsible trips that are empowering the local community, that are helping to conserve the local wildlife and environment, they're really kind of making that flight impact kind of count and you know, kind of balance out some of that impact. And I think there's something to be said about choosing airline partners well, and that's both the responsibility of the client and their own education, but also very much of travel operators such as ourselves, making sure the kind of aviation partners that we're partnering with are making moves in areas of development of biofuels and lower carbon impact flights as well. So I think there's some kind of encouraging. It is a really tough topic to address as an industry, but I think we are starting finally to talk openly and work together collaboratively about addressing that issue, and engaging with the client as well in helping to kind of answer their desire to take trips that are lower carbon impact.
And do you see any other opportunities or changes in terms of perhaps people are looking for more sort of socially distanced holidays now, so looking to less crowded places, and that perhaps could spread tourism out to a more diverse spread of communities? And Veronica or Megan, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely see some trends towards domestic tourism and towards going back to nature. I definitely see that here in Canada. I can see it definitely in different other markets where also domestic tourism is becoming more important, as there is a lot of insecurity right now. But of course, we can't say what that's going to mean in the long run. We do expect tourism to bounce back, but exactly how, I think that's still a very big question mark. The trends we're seeing now are immediate trends: domestic tourism and going back to nature. But also something I wanted to mention in terms of carbon emissions, there's also the topic around offsetting, right? In a lot of these touristic destinations, that's the type of projects that we're also looking at. We have this mangrove restoration projects in the Dominican Republic. So through that project, there's actually a lot of carbon sequestration that does happen. So I think that the carbon dialogue is much bigger than just looking at airlines. I think it's much bigger, and seeing how we are also working with the other resources that we have, and protecting wildlife and nature.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, there was actually, I think the whole carbon debate, I mean, we've got to, obviously we've got to address it. And, things like longer trips, less whistle stop tours is something that I think we've all got a responsibility to promote. But, for example, I know that Kevin Rushby recently wrote an article in The Guardian about Guyana, and he actually probably address this much more articulately than I can, but he actually really tackled this idea of sort of like the amount of carbon that he had taken him to get to Guyana, and then looked at sort of the effect that tourism was having on these sort of remote areas of the Amazon, and that it was actually protecting the Amazon in the ways that otherwise they would be exploited. And I think we've really, I mean, as Veronica said before, it's so powerful, tourism, and I think it's really important that we see it, that people go out to these remote places and they're interested, and it's actually making them ambassadors to protect things like the Amazon for the future.
Yeah, definitely. Seeing responsible tourism as a force for good is, I think, where we need to just keep going.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to travel agents actually integrating sustainability into their conversations with clients, what tips do you have? Like, perhaps, I don't know if clients are prioritizing sustainability at the moment. Do you think their mindsets have changed? Kasia, perhaps you could start.
Yeah, I think there's been an increasing kind of body of research being done into the consumer mindset post-COVID, and you're absolutely right. What we're seeing as an operator and what we're hearing from our agent is that absolutely safety is at the moment number one kind of factor for people looking into their holidays, and the research bears that up. But interestingly, sustainability doesn't come too far behind that as a reinforcing factor, and really it has not only kind of maintained its precedence as a reinforcing factor, but actually various kind of, again, evidence is starting to show that the consumer mindset has shifted such that actually that's become a more important factor through the various experiences that we've all had over the last few months, whether it's closer kind of relationship with nature and seeing the impact of that, or personal choices we've made which has led to positive impact with regard to lockdown, etc. So I think, yeah, in terms of kind of talking to our agent partners, it's just that sense that, yes, absolutely, be talking about safety, be talking about flexible booking, but don't forget that sustainability is still a really powerful kind of reinforcing factor, looking at how communities can be kind of empowered and rebuilt through the kind of responsible travels that clients might want to take. looking at how nature and biodiversity, as both Megan and Veronica talked about, is directly protected and conserved through, again, the kind of responsible travel that we want to see our travellers taking. So just being aware that for clients that is still a very kind of active and actually kind of possibly even more pertinent factor in their minds when looking for a trip, a holiday to take.
And Megan, do you have anything to add in terms of tips for travel agents booking this sort of?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is that, I mean, particularly if I'm looking at Latin America, which obviously I generally am, I think that, that generally the clients that want to travel to Latin America are quite adventurous. And I think that those sorts of travelers are looking to sort of for new experiences, to engage with local communities. So I think there isn't it's not a big gap between speaking about that and actually speaking about traveling responsibly and what part travelers have in traveling responsibly. So I think that's a really good segue into it. Tips for agents: Lata are launching travel agent membership next month. So agents that want to sort of keep up to date with sustainability and responsible travel, I'd really recommend them joining Lata, because it does remain very much top of our agenda on a regular basis, and all of the news about Latin America.
And just one last question then, what would the ideal kind of travel future look like to each of you if you were to envisage a utopia of responsible tourism? Veronica, could you start?
Well, this is a utopia for myself, I guess. I really I think that it would be great if people could be a bit also more mindful when booking their trips, right? Because I think there are so many options now to travel sustainably. I think it requires a lot more planning, perhaps, and motivation. So my hope would be for travelers to really plan a bit more. I think travel has become so easy and so accessible that we sometimes forget what goes into that and what we could plan and how we can plan better. So I would really hope that people plan their trips a bit more and really value the destination that they're going to. So value the nature, value the people, value that you're going somewhere new and that you're there to experience something new and beautiful, and hopefully we could keep it that way for years to come.
Kasia, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, absolutely echo what Veronica said, all about conscious travel and being aware of and asking the questions about whether the kind of travel you're doing is benefiting local people and places that you're going to. And just coming out of lockdown, seeing travel as a real privilege again, we kind of all, I think, we're perhaps a bit complacent or took for granted where we could get to and how often we could go, and actually just I suppose kind of finding some of that lovely excitement and inspiration, and not taking for granted we get the opportunity and the privilege of, so I think that kind of attitude around travel would be fantastic in the travel utopia going forward.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to appreciate it a whole lot more after all of this. And Megan, anything else to add to that?
I mean, I obviously really sort of echo what Veronica and Kasia have said. I think for me, what I would really like in the trade is just for sustainability to be sort of top of the agenda for everybody. So whether it's sort of, the product managers looking at new tours, for clients looking at new trips, that basically they look at the way that a company operates, and their sustainability credentials are as important as their safety credentials. That would be my hope. And hopefully we will. I think we did make some headway in that, and I think hopefully the future of that is still in place, and we can continue to work towards that.
Okay, and on that positive note, I think that's all we've got time for, but thanks all so much for joining me. I mean, let's hope that people do really start to think about these issues moving forward, and that we use this time to rebuild in the best way possible.